Last time we talked about a figure in Arthurian myth and tradition known as the wounded king, but we really didn't discuss how to heal from these wounds. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In this video, I'm going to be giving multiple examples of how to do it and how it impacts our lives and prevents us from being sovereign beings and what even being a sovereign being even means. So some of the things that we're going to be going over are childhood trauma, making it so that way we understand that there's a shadow work that needs to be done and what shadow work is, um, what the dynamics are that cause us to behave in ways that we don't necessarily like, things of this particular nature that we're going to go on with it. And so, if this all sounds fascinating with you, let's continue forward. Now, why should you trust someone like myself on this? I've been studying mythology and history for almost 15 years now. It is a passion of mine, and it is how I have chosen to overcome my own demons and make myself a better person by understanding the lessons of history and what the stories have to tell us and how to take the journey that needs to be taken within. So let's begin your own quest for healing and potentially even going on your own true Grail quest. Just like all the mythologies of not just the Arthurian tradition, but throughout the world, actually endeavor us to go after some sort of healing vessel. And welcome to Forbidden Knowledge. Last time, the Wounded King, we discussed how the difference between a something that's like an injury versus a wound. And a wound is something that doesn't heal over time. It's something that's still there and continues to cause problems as time goes onward. Something that just is an injury is something that has to take time to heal naturally. Most of these wounds are so deep-seated inside of us that we don't even understand or their implications for ourselves, and they make it so that way we lash out against others or create these abuse victim cycles that are going on with it. Inside of the Arthurian tradition, we have it popping up through ancient Indo-European understanding of what the king, being a sovereign being, isn't supposed to be wounded or injured or in any way, shape, or form because of the relationship with the land. For more on that, go and rewatch that video that's there, and I'll put a card up somewhere around here in order to make it so that way you can go and do that. Now, what this has to do with our modern sense of self is that Percival, first off, his name most likely means pierce the veil or pierce the valley. So you have a valley, which is the shape like this, and it's a shape of the Grail, in and of itself and whatnot. And you have a feminine idea here, right? This is the ancient symbol for womanhood, an inverted triangle like that, and an ancient one for manhood is this, the pyramid one inverted with it, and you have to pierce the veil for what's going on there. So, or pierce the valley. And what that symbolizes balance between the masculine and the feminine already in his name and what needs to be done there in terms of going on. He's not the only one that goes on a Grail quest, but since he's the one that we used last time, we're going to use him as our example. And it fits perfectly because he's also called the Welshman or the Fool. So he's someone who's ignorant of the ways of the world. He is someone who is known as the Welshman, which in ancient time periods for England and for the British Isles meant foreigner, as in someone who didn't understand the ways of that particular culture that he was in or that she was in. And what this means is that Percival is very childlike, and you can see that in the stories where he doesn't understand anything about the ways of the world and men and knights and ladies and all these other things that go along with it. He just clearly has no clue because he represents our inner child. And it's our inner child that has been wounded effectively and makes us when we grow up and become a king or a queen or a sovereign being that we cannot actually become whole. And making it so that way the only one that can heal us is the originally wounded child that's going on there. So there's always something in most people's lives that have happened to them while they were younger that they never got over that has become a huge part of who they are today. And it impacts the world around them, and it impacts themselves and all their relationships that are going on with it. And until they're able to go and deep dive what that is and overcome what that is, they will continuously make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And this will cause problems for themselves and for the world around them, hence why it's referred to as the wasteland inside of the Arthurian tradition, that it is something that is not productive, something that is not abundant, something that is doing things that are exact opposite of what most of us claim that we want. Most of us want peace and abundance, and we want love, and we want freedom, and we want all these other great things that all humanity practically wants, and yet we as a species don't have that. So clearly there's something else that's getting in the way here. Now, how this is playing out is because we don't have a balanced dynamic. We have to where we fall into typically one category or another. We fall into the abuser or the abused cycle, the abuser-victim cycle. And this typically pans out in childhood. I'm going to give an example of and whatnot, and this is one that's pretty obvious, but it is still something that's true for many people. And so let's say that you came from a household where your parents didn't get along well with it, and that your father was physically abusive to your mother at this, and you witness it as a child. You're 6, 7 years old or whatever. You don't understand what's going on. You don't understand the implications of what's happening there with it, but you are traumatized by that particular event. What happens here is that you make it so that way unconsciously you have to make a choice. Do you want to be the one that's getting injured like your mom? Or do you want to be like your dad, where he's the one that's causing the harm, the physical harm to your mother? And if the child chooses to be like the mom, then they're choosing to make it so that way they don't want to do harm to anybody else, and they've chosen a morally correct one, but they have also made it so that way they have this victim mentality now, and that causes problems going forward for themselves and for the world, because now you're still playing the same imbalanced dynamic, and it leads to a lot of improper thinking on multiple different things that are going on, and the actions that are taken. And it creates and perpetuates the cycle of abuse, because now you are going to be making it so that way unconsciously you are seeking out people who are going to abuse you, or putting yourself unconsciously in situations where you can be used and abused in various different forms depending on how that plays out in your life. On the flip side, if you choose to make it so that way you are the child in this example, and that you don't want to be the one that's getting harmed with it, and that you would rather be the one that's taking it out on people, because that's the only choice that you see as a kid unconsciously. You don't realize there's a third option, which we'll talk about in a moment, that then you're the one that becomes the one that does the abuse, the one that allows that for to go and do that, and wants to dominate others, and wants to have power over them, and wants to make it so that way they are beneath you and that you are in charge. Again, this creates a huge dynamic that has a bunch of problems for what's going on with it. So if you think that this doesn't cause problems, I would suggest looking at any totalitarian regime in history. It's because the people became too subservient to other people that were above them, that decided that they wanted to rule over them, and it's perpetuating that cycle, which always leads to destruction and chaos and to other things that are going on there. So yes, this will lead to a wasteland, quite literally, if we allow it and we don't change things inside of ourselves. Right? You can see this with Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, plenty of other examples. Those are just from the 20th century alone, in terms of tyrants and tyranny and that kind of thing from what's going on. Okay? It allows the psychological components to continue onward and making it so that way there's all these problems from that. Now, the next thing is that there's the third option, which we don't see as children, which is that we can choose to neither be the abuser nor the abused. And it makes it so that way we can choose to go and stand up for ourselves, do no harm, but take no shit. Masculine and feminine principles there, with the non-aggression principle of doing no harm to anybody else, and the self-defense principle of not allowing yourself or anybody else that you see that can't defend themselves becoming abused, and stopping that by implementing the self-defense principles. And this can take multiple different forms depending upon the situation, of course, but the point is that it needs to be balanced, just like the story in and of itself is suggesting with Percival's own name, piercing the veil or piercing the valley. So this is a big part of what's going on there. Percival is somebody who represents this function, the child that comes into this world that doesn't understand anything about the world, and it's only through him that can the wounded king be healed, and therefore the entire wasteland be healed, after he has obtained the Grail and understands the other hollows that are there. So this is a big part of what's going on that particular front. So the better understanding of this dynamic and how this can play out in your own life, you need to ask questions of yourself, like, well, where are areas that I allow things to happen to me that I don't want to happen to me, or where do I go and constantly cause problems for other people that I don't want to cause those problems for any people anymore. This is why the question that he did fail to ask is, whom does the Grail serve, or something along those lines with it, depending upon the story. He fails to ask that question after seeing these things. He doesn't even go on the quest for what's going on. He hasn't realized that he had already witnessed the solution to his problems, and because he was too naive to do so, then that doesn't happen. Now, on a mythological motif for what's going on here, most people are wondering, well, okay, are the stories just all male-oriented? Why is it always men that are going out and doing the action and that kind of stuff? It is because of the fact that taking action and going and doing that is a masculine component and principle for what's happening. It is not because of the writers or authors being sexist. It's because of the time period for them witnessing these two ideas for what it is. Men were the ones that were at the outside of things. They were the ones that were the protectors of society. They didn't allow people to go to the inner core of their society, which were women and children, due to how unsafe a lot of these areas and time periods were, with raiders and with people who wanted to do harm to other people and whatnot, and also just because of the fact that men were the ones that would go out and do the hunting and all these other things with it. I'm explaining the historical aspects and why this is being done with it, rather than like our modern sensibilities and whether women should be treated one way or not. That's not the point here. I'm trying to explain why the ancient stories are the way that they are. So the men were easily seen. They were easily understood. They were right there in the front of things with it, whereas the women weren't. They were always behind the scenes. They were always more subtle. They were always more hidden, but they weren't any less powerful for what was going on. Proof of this is still even found within the Arthurian mythos and tradition in and of itself. It's an old crone hag type archetype that shows up that gives Percival absolute crap for him not asking the question that needed to be done with it. And she represents the goddess inside of the traditions that we talked about before on the last episode, and the merging of that with that for the king and how that works for the Indo-Europeans as well as other people, but they were the main ones. And you make it so that way she is the one that is pushing him to go and like actually find stuff with it, and because of her giving him crap, he actually goes and tries to renew his quest in order to find the Grail again and to actually salvage the situation and save the wounded king. And so you have that internal aspect, the internal component that's going on there. And he has to go and deep dive that internal aspect of himself, the deeper, more subtle aspects, which is why he has to also pierce the veil for what's going on in order to recover the treasure that he needs to, in this case, the hollows, specifically the Grail, and all that it comes into being with it. We're not going to talk about the Grail on this particular episode in terms of what it represents and what that'll be multiple episodes in and of itself. But this is kind of where things are and why they are that particular way. Now, if you've gotten anything from this, I would really encourage you to like and subscribe because it'll really help the channel out, and it'll also help other people who need this material in order to help themselves get out of the situation, whatever that is for them that they want to overcome better and become better people, and therefore help the world start healing as well, because that's how our world is built. It's built upon all of the individuals that are in the world making the better decisions and better choices and moving humanity upward rather than, continuing to have the same cycles of history that we have repeated over and over again. Now, to continue onward, we also have another component here that needs to be discussed, and that is the whole balance idea that we've talked about before between the male and the female. Now, I've been touching on this somewhat, but there's also the hemispheres of the brain, and you have one that functions very like a masculine traditional understanding of it, very analytical, very logical, very much wanting to serialize and compartmentalize things and all that other stuff, and very fact-based. Then you have the other side, which is the creative, intuitive, generative side, and these two principles have to be balanced again in order to make it so that way you can function properly in life. If you go too far to one side, it causes all these problems for you and around and with your relationships, and the same thing for the other side with it, and you don't want to get too out of whack. Most people fall into one or the other. In our modern world, more people, at least in Western culture, fall into the left brain, analytical, logical trappings of stuff with it. And then, you also have where there are problems that pop up from the other side as well, where you're too much not taking action, too submissive, too not doing anything with it, versus the other side, which is very uncaring and not giving a damn about anything other than themselves, which both cause too many problems with it. Again, the balance has to be there, and that's what these ancient stories are telling us for what it is. That's what the ancient Hebrew Star of David is about. The masculine and the feminine coming together for the two there in balance is what it originally, intention and meaning behind it was and is. So we also have another component that's going on here, and that is the fact that you have to go on some sort of deep dive into your own self and understanding that, which you can view. This, a lot of the stories that were going on that are having to do with the hero's descent into the underworld or into some other plane of existence and whatnot, and that will be what we will be talking about more in our next episode. And so I hope you got something from this today. I enjoy putting these out for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And if you missed the Wounded King, then please go and watch the last episode regarding him. Thank you very much.